Awkward Jazz. Awkward Jazz.
I saw on YouTube you did that version of The Road Ahead of your tune, which was some
Yes,
kind of activity.
I re-recorded it. I'd recorded it in the 90s.
Yeah, with Vic and Billy.
Yeah, Billy was on that. And I decided, since that record was never really released in this country, that I'd re-record a few songs from that recording.
Yeah.
And Road Ahead was one of them.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful.
Yeah, and it was great to hear what Joel did with it, and Louise and Eric.
Yeah.
You know.
I wanted to ask you about this to start with the new one, A Change in the Weather, and I listened to it. It's you gathered such an amazing band. I mean, like Joel Fromm and Luis Perdomo and Eric, McPherson. And was this like a group in this recording, just gathered for the recording, or did you guys play it together? Or
well, here's the backstory on all of that.
Oh, please.
I had a brunch gig in New York at a place called Cafe Loop for like 18 years.
Wow.
And originally it was Bob Kindred's job, and he passed it on to me. And when I took it over, we were still using horns, guitar and horns. Originally it was Bob Kindred and John Hart and myself. Oh. John took a job in Florida. Bob moved away and eventually passed away. And so I was the last man standing. So I took over the job. And Louise joined me on that job, and because they didn't want horns. And before that, I'm getting ahead of myself. Joel Fromm used to do the gig quite regularly.
Okay.
He'd come in and play. And it was Matthew Freeze at the time. And then Matthew left, and then Louise took over. And then they decided they didn't want any horns anymore because it was too loud.
Sure.
So that's when we became a trio with Louise and Ron Afif, and we did the job for about 2 or 3 years. So that's how I got to know Louise.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And then Louise asked me to do some trio hits. We did at Mezzaro, three or four, with Eric, and I always wanted to play with Eric.
Yes, that's right.
And so that was really fun with Eric McPherson. So then when I got the offer to do the state, I asked Joel to join us. And it was great because Joel I've been doing some gigs at Smalls with the quartet, and Billy, of course, Billy's one of the guys, Rich Perry and Joel Fromm are the 3 tenor players I usually use. See whoever's available.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So that's how we ended up with the date. I wanted to use some new people, and it was great.
Yeah, it's nice because it's a different energy, than the previous records, especially with Eric. I mean,
right.
I love his playing so much with you as a rhythm section. It's really like going somewhere else. So it's quite cool.
Yeah, it felt great. The fact that we got to play trio together with Louise 3 or 4 times was great. And I knew that it would be great. He'd be great, to do the record. Yeah. And I was really lucky. I was able to get everybody together at one time, which isn't easy when you're using guys of that caliber. They're all out doing, they're all out doing whatever they're doing, and it's not easy, but it all worked out, so I was feeling very fortunate about that.
Yeah, it's a really nice record. I mean, but it's again for Steeplechase, and
yes,
and I wanted to
ask you. I hadn't done a record for Steeplechase. Yeah, 10 years it was. For my last record.
Yeah, how did you guys hook up in the beginning with Steeplechase with Nielsen?
I was back in the 90s. My first record I did, Fred Hersch helped me get started.
Okay, yeah, because Fred is on it.
We formed a cooperative group with Fred and Jeff Hirshfield, and I called the group ETC. It was actually my group, but Fred helped me, and we recorded a demo, and I sold the project to Red Records, They said they'd
Oh, really?
handle us, and we were supposed to do a bunch of records. We only did two. The second one was ETC plus one with Jerry Bergonzi.
Hmm.
But my hope was to do one with Tom Harold and just add different horn players with that trio. And it never transpired. So then I'm like, I really want to do my own record. And I did a couple of dates for Steeplechase with Andy LaVerne.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how I met Niels. And then
Okay.
Niels, I also had done a demo tape of a trio with Marc Copland and Jeff Hirshfield. And I sold part of that to Niels. And then Billy joined us for the very first record. And that
Yeah.
was like 93 maybe,
Where you go? Yeah. Still,
a
but
long time ago.
yeah. How
And
did you
then
decide?
what's that?
No. Just go on, please. I'll save the question.
Okay. And then Mark was playing piano and Billy. And then at some point I added, the next record I added Vic Juris.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was, and the
Beautiful.
nucleus of the band was Billy, Mark, and Vic, and Jeff.
Yeah.
And then that kind of, over the years, that changed a little bit. Mark left. He was getting so busy. And then I did just a quartet with Dave Ballou and Billy
Yeah. I know
and
that one.
Vic
That's beautiful.
and Jeff. And we did quite a few records together that way. And then there was the Ram record, which is not most people don't know of. I don't know if you've ever heard that one.
With whom is that?
Well, that's Jim McNeely,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Billy, Vic Juris, and Jeff Hirshfield.
Okay. So that's the one where The Road Ahead is also on, right? I think
Yeah,
so.
that's the name of that album. It's
Yeah.
called The
Okay.
Road Ahead.
Yeah. I think I
And it's
listened to it on your
fun.
channel. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
only way you can find it.
Yeah.
And that was one of my, that's actually one of my top three recordings. I absolutely love that record. It was different than Steeplechase because
Yeah.
the record producer, Raimondo Metalupe out of Italy, gave me 2 days and we had the best studio. And it was a very relaxed recording session.
Yeah. That's important, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I also had won a grant to write the
Okay.
music for that record. So
That
I was
helps.
able to stay home for a month and just write music and not have to worry about everything else, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
At,
That's so
at the
cool.
time I had a family, you know, I had 3 kids and it was really difficult, you
Yeah.
know. So that grant was a lifesaver.
Yeah. But
And
you
that
mentioned
record, you know, that record
you have to check it out even
is
more.
just one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some good moments on there. And I was, in those days I was working every night in New York. If I
Well,
wasn't touring, I was playing. So my hands were really strong. A matter of fact, we had done the night before that, I'd done 2 nights at the Zinc Bar, the original
yeah.
Zinc Bar, with Joe DiOrio and Jeff Hirshfield. And Joe hadn't played
Man.
in New York in 15 or 20 years. And everybody, and the original Zinc Bar was really small. I don't know if you were ever at that place.
I
I
I don't
mean, it was
know.
tiny.
Yeah. I think I was at the
And
later one. Yeah. Yeah.
I think Matheny was there.
Yeah.
I mean,
Scott John.
every guitar player in the New York area came out for that. And it was also during the days when people could smoke in the club. So, I mean, my asthma, my lungs were killing me the next day when we recorded that in the Road Ahead album.
Man.
I could barely breathe, but it was, you know, my hands were strong and
Yeah.
that was a great time period. That was a great time period for me. I
Also
was
big.
so
Yeah.
fortunate. Yeah, I mean, and then but after we did the Zinc Bar, we did a quartet with Vic and Joe, and that was the first time they had played together.
2 guitars?
Yeah, Vic Juris and Joe DiOrio, myself and
Wow.
Jeff Hirsch.
Did
We
you
did a
guys ever
gig.
record something or?
No,
Or
it
ah,
was just
damn.
a one-man gig. It was at the old Birdland uptown.
Oh man.
And it was great because Joe and Vic hit it off, man. It was like super incredible.
Yeah, two such underrated players, but so original and so good, man. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, I love
It
those
was
guys.
it was really something to hear the two of them play
Wow,
together.
that's
Yeah,
amazing.
those were good days, and that's how I kind of etched into the steeplechase thing. Kind of happened,
Yeah,
and I was lucky. I did a lot of records for them,
yeah,
my own, recorded a lot of my own music, and then the last one I did was I think in '09, and I kind of took some time off.
yeah, yeah,
So and I've been writing a lot of music and busy teaching and
yeah.
life interrupted.
Sure, sure,
You know,
sure. But you mentioned composing and the grant, right?
yeah.
Like, how do you approach compose? I mean, I've spoken about you with Billy as well, and about your compositions, and we were both like, yeah, man, Steve is such an amazing bassist and a composer as well. You wrote so many beautiful ballads, like that Lost Lullaby, man. That's one of the nicest melodies I've ever heard. It's just like,
The
or,
Lost Lullaby.
yeah, or Always Believe and all those, like,
Yeah.
what's,
Well, those tunes, a lot of those tunes have special meaning in my heart.
ah,
You know, um, my life has been really great, but I've had some extremely difficult times too.
sure,
And writing those tunes to help me heal
yeah, it's
um,
important.
is like therapy. And like Life in the Cove from the new record, I wrote that because my wife and I bought this beautiful place that's outside of New York, but very close. But yet we're on a river. We're on the Hackensack River,
Mm,
and you think you live in the forest in here, but yet you can see the World Trade Center a few blocks down. You can see the top of the world. That's how close we are.
wow,
So it's really a beautiful way to live, and we have a beautiful house, and that's what that whole song means.
yeah,
And
yeah,
Always Believe was written for my daughters who've
okay,
been, going through some up and downs, and
sure.
and you know, a lot of my ballads have meaning, heartfelt meaning.
That's why I guess they're so beautiful, because there's something behind it. It's not like, thrown changes and just like writing
Yeah.
whatever on it, I guess.
The Lost Lullaby I wrote for my wife when I first met her, and
Really.
she was out of town, and I wrote that for her.
I'll say, yeah, that's for me, really, when I heard that, I was like, damn, it's so beautiful. And
Thank you.
really, but yeah, speechless always when I hear that one. Yeah,
Thank you. I studied classical composition for a bunch of years,
that helps. Yeah.
and I've written a lot of classical stuff, but I've never gotten to hear it played.
Hmm.
And I've always had this affinity for classical music and
Yeah,
operas and things like that. And
yeah, that's why melody is so important, I
the
guess, right?
music, yeah, and then the tunes come to me, but I don't know where they come from. They just happen. It's just there,
You write on the
you
piano
know.
usually, or like,
Usually the piano, yes.
yeah, yeah, okay, yeah,
I'm not a great pianist, but I can figure out what I want.
yeah, yeah,
And I'm always writing down ideas. With this record, when I did this record, I'm like, okay, I have to write some new music, and then I have sketchbooks, and I found all this music ideas that I've been working on.
that's so
So
important.
the only two new tunes from that record are Changing the Weather and Moving Forward.
Yeah, that's nice.
I think are then Life in the Cove was new, and Always Believe and Lost Lullaby, and then Road Ahead and When It's Time Again were tunes I'd previously
Yeah,
recorded for
it did.
Steeplechase.
Yeah,
And Serenity. Serenity was another. Serenity, that was when we originally recorded that with Billy, and Ben Monger was
yeah,
on that one,
I
and Fred
know
Hirsch.
that with Fred, man, that's such a record. Seriously. Well,
Yeah, I was really lucky. And Ben ended up on it. The backstory with that is he came in and sight read everything. Vic was supposed to do it, and Vic's father passed away the night before the recording session.
Wow, yeah.
So I faxed Ben all the music. He came in and played it like he'd been playing it forever.
Yeah,
Just amazing,
he's a monster. Yeah, he's like, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he can read anything, and so Serenity, when we did it for Steeplechase, Billy played clarinet. I wanted it to be like a New Age tune,
Ah, okay.
and it was just, you know, Walter Becker had asked me to write some music. He was one of the guys that got me started writing music,
Oh, really?
and yes, I did some recording dates for him in the 90s, and he's like, you should be writing more music. And he said, why don't you send me a demo of some New Age? I mean, he was going to start working with maybe Windham Hill or one of those
Yeah,
labels
yeah.
back then. And so I sent him my New Age music, and he's like, no, it's not, it won't work, you know. But he loved the compositions. He says, keep writing, but you're definitely not New Age.
Yeah, sure.
That's
I
right.
think
I'm
so.
old age.
Yeah. But did you write already before, like
You
in
know.
the 80s? Like your own music or?
I'd written some tunes in the 80s. I wrote 3 tunes in the 80s.
Hmm.
And Marion McPartlin actually recorded one of them.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Yes. And Jim Hall recorded one of my tunes. And then Vic Juris recorded one of my tunes too that
Oh.
aren't recorded on other records.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I started in Chicago writing music,
Yeah.
but I never had the I never felt secure enough letting anybody see it, you know. And when I moved to New York in '79, and I started working with Marion, and she's like, "Well, what do you have? Let's play?" And she actually, it was the first tune I had ever written,
Wow.
and we used to play it all the time.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So I felt like I should keep it up, and actually, going even back further, I went to a tarot card reader. A guy looked at my cards, and he said, you should be writing." And I said, "Well, what do you mean I should be writing?" He says, "You should be writing." And I always thought he was talking about literary
Yeah.
writing, which I can't do. I don't have that command of the language. But some years later, when I really started writing music, I'm like, maybe this is what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's a love thing. I love composing, and like I said, a lot of it doesn't get played, but it just, for me, it's
The process, right? Yeah.
sad.
For me, it's the same. Yeah. Just to get it out, and even if you don't record it, it helps.
Right. I mean, I've been teaching at William Patterson for 20 years now,
Wow.
and I really lean on my students to write
Yeah.
because I think it really helps. It really helps because when you're improvising, you're writing. You're just
Yeah.
instantly, writing music. And I think if you slow it down and you work on composing, it helps. It helps with the improvising.
Yeah.
I think it
Definitely.
works together.
Definitely. It goes hand in hand.
So-
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
you becoming
Mhm.
like, okay, you composed then. I mean, I would like to ask you later about your New York move and Chicago also, but like since we were speaking about you as a composer and band leader, you became a band leader at least as a first record out fairly late. Did you like lead groups already before, like in the 80s, or
No.
what was the
No,
decision for you to
I
become a band leader?
well, yeah,
A tough
that's
one,
kind
I
of
mean, but
a funny story. I mean, I grew up idolizing Charlie Mingus.
oh yeah,
He was one of the first people I heard when I first got into playing bass, and I always loved his compositions. And some guy came up to me once in Chicago, and he said, "You're a pretty good bass player. Too bad you can never lead a band."
oh
And I said, "Well, do you know who Charlie Mingus is?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, then we have nothing else to say." And I walked away.
sure.
But I didn't know I was going to lead a band I didn't know, I knew I enjoyed writing music when I did write, um, but it just happened. I just decided, you know, I wanted to do my own records and I wanted to record my own music.
Yeah,
And I didn't know if I could find anybody that would take that. And back in those days, I got a lot of no's from people,
yeah,
you know. I
sure.
would,
I can.
and I always say, no isn't a word I haven't heard before. And I just keep knocking on those doors,
Yeah,
and then I met Neil and Neil saw something there.
yeah,
And that's how that started. I was very fortunate.
yeah. We're all happy. Good music getting out. So it's so cool. Yeah,
Well, I mean, now there's so much music out there. There's so much music.
yeah,
The digital age changed everything, made it easier in some ways and harder in others, you know.
yeah. For me, it's always I'm like, yeah, it's easier accessible through, but like this romanticism is kind of taken away, of expecting an
Yeah.
album, of opening, you know what I mean, like of not
Sure.
being
I
able to
really,
get an album, like now you
well, I
can just.
tell my students, when I was young, when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I used to have to get on the train and go to downtown Chicago,
Yeah,
and there was one record store on Wabash, and I would spend most of the day going through all the records to figure out which two records I could afford to buy. You know,
yeah.
so it was a different process, and I was quite lucky because my dad played bass,
Oh,
and
really?
he had a bunch of records already in the house. So, but there was like a 10-year gap from when he stopped buying records and when I started, and I was worried that I missed something in those years.
Yeah.
I didn't know what had happened, you know.
Who were these
So,
records, like these first records that got you excited, like for jazz, let's say? You remember? Like,
well, um, I think when I was like a freshman in high school, I'd been playing bass since junior high school,
hmm.
and I used to play a lot of electric bass.
Oh,
And
wow.
I played in a couple of bands in junior high school, and everybody played the same stuff. And they wanted me to play the same bass lines that Paul McCartney played or whoever was playing bass for the Rolling Stones. And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to make up my own. I don't know why I wanted to make up my own, but I decided that I wanted to make up my own. And in the meantime, I would hear my dad play, and he'd have people over at the house, and they'd play sessions. And so I said to my father, I said, this jazz stuff, what is it about? He says, well, it's more improvising. And he showed me what a blues was. And I said, so I can make up my own bass lines? And he's like, yeah, well, that's basically what you do. And then he pulled out a record of Oscar Pettiford, and then a record of Paul Chambers, and
Ah,
then a record of Ray Brown, and then a record of Milt Hinton. And the last one was Red Mitchell. And I'm like, that's it. I'm sold. This is, and music seemed like something that I picked up easily. I
hmm.
wasn't having an easy time with school academics, but music was like seemed to be
Yeah,
something I
there.
could do.
Yeah.
And I decided, the end of my freshman year, after going to a music camp, a jazz music camp, that this is what I really enjoyed doing.
Hmm. Yeah. Did you like also go
So,
to jazz concerts like at that time as a teenager? Like,
no, the only live jazz I heard was when my dad would have people over.
hmm.
And then in high school, there was, I lived in the suburbs, and I heard Count Basie was playing in a shopping center parking lot they were having.
Well,
So my parents couldn't take me, but I talked my neighbor into taking me there. And my parents told me I couldn't go because it was pretty far away. But my neighbor took me there, and he says, "Well, how are you going to get home?" I says, I don't know. I'll figure it out." And it was a Basie band, and I stayed and listened to the whole concert. And I even watched them pack up and get back on the bus. And then I realized it was 10 o'clock at night and I didn't have any way to get home.
uh,
So I called the neighbor up again and he came and got me. And I got me home right before my parents got home. And it's like I'd walked into the house and they saw the light go on because there was no lights. And my mother came in and she said, "What did you do?" And I says, "Well, I went to hear Count Basie." And she said, "Oh, guy, that's it. He's hooked, you know. Luckily, I didn't get punished or anything, but I needed to hear a live band,
Yeah,
and hearing Casey, Lockjaw Davis, I think, was playing in that band. It was just,
yeah.
that was
Monder.
it. And that really was it.
Yeah.
That's when it all started. But I also had the classical thing too that I really liked doing.
Hmm.
So I was
That's
studying
important.
classical with someone, and I was kind of really divided on which route I was going to go.
Yeah. But it did the classical thing like you play the melody so beautiful. I don't know when you the upper register and everything what you play. Did this come from the classical or you transcribing like the jazz masters or both basically?
I think it came from more classical because
Yeah.
I was up until about 19. I wanted to be a Gary Carr. Gary Carr was like the first solo guy to play solo bass, and that's what I wanted to do. And
Okay.
my classical teacher at the time talked me out of it. He said, "There's no work for that. You never, And I let him talk me. And then, I used to go hear the symphony every week. I'd hang out with him, and then I remember, I don't remember who it was, but I went and played a session in downtown Chicago, and I'm like, you know what? I think this is what I'd rather do. I was supposed to audition for the opera, lyric
Oh,
opera,
wow.
and I'm like, no, I'm going to go play jazz. And
How
my
cool.
teacher he says, you want to spend the rest of your life in smoky jazz clubs? And I said, yeah, I do.
That's a clear answer then.
And at the time, Rufus Reed was studying with the same bass teacher.
Oh, wow.
Rufus was at Northwestern University then. And I'm like, yeah, I want to be like Rufus. And my dad, because my dad played in jazz clubs
Yeah.
back in the 50s and 60s. So
But
yeah, classical thing helped, and I've
yeah,
always loved
definitely.
loved that kind of music too, and as well as Motown and everything else.
Yeah.
So my palette for music is pretty wide.
Yeah. Yeah. But we're talking about like early 70s in Chicago now, right? Or mid 70s. Like,
Um, early 70s,
yeah.
early 70s. I graduated high school like a semester early and started at University of Illinois, which was a jazz school,
Yeah.
and I had a great jazz program. And then I didn't get the deal they were supposed to give me, and I was going back to Chicago every weekend to work
Mm.
gigs. And I'm like,
So
what?
you were
I'm going.
playing like gigs already and stuff and everything like that.
Yeah, I started playing gigs when I was like 15, 16.
Wow. That's
Club
beautiful.
dates. My
Yeah.
dad would double book himself and send me. I was, I was working back in those days. I would work, weddings, and there was Friday night, Saturday in the afternoon, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon.
Wow. That's amazing.
As soon as I got a driver's license, I was like, boom.
Wow. And how
And
was it like for you to establish a name like on the Chicago scene?
well,
Like,
no, it was all club dates. It wasn't with
oh,
like
okay.
the big guys in Chicago. It
Okay.
was like the working guys that my dad worked with, and they were pretty good musicians.
Okay.
The leap didn't happen for me till I was studying with Rufus in high school, or no, out of high school. I think it
Hmm.
was out of high school. I don't remember now. And Rufus was going out of town, and he called a few people, and he said, "Look, you need a bass player. I'm not in town. Call this guy." And that's how it started.
And who were these other guys that you started to play then, like on the basis of Rufus's?
Well, it was, a guy named Joe Daly, who was like a bebop legend, Richie Corpolongo. Oh, God, I'm drawing the piano. I'm trying to think. Von Friedman
Oh,
was there
wow.
those
Amazing.
days. Jody Christian. There were a bunch of great musicians. And
Yeah.
it took a while for them to hire me because I was this kid. But I remember Rufus helped me get on a job with Buddy Montgomery and Eddie Harris.
Wow.
And I was in the rehearsal, and Rufus was there, and they were playing Wave, and I didn't know Wave, and Rufus was whispering the chord
Change.
changes in my
Oh
ear.
man. Wow. That's
So
amazing.
he was a big help. He helped me, and then I worked a couple of gigs with Buddy Montgomery after that.
That's amazing.
And there were some other guys, Larry Novak, Judy Roberts. There were some really great players in Chicago in that time period. And there were a lot of gigs. I mean, there
Yeah.
were the Room and the Jazz Showcase. Although I never worked the Jazz Showcase as a pickup musician.
Mm.
But I decided, and I also was doing a lot of TV commercials in Chicago. I was making.
Oh, sure, of course, that was the scene still, right? Yeah.
I was playing electric bass on those, and I really wanted to play more upright than electric, but I felt like I was always being called to play electric bass. And that's when I married are you there? I just
Yeah.
got a
Yeah.
okay. Something weird just popped up.
Uh,
Marrying McParland, there was a place called Rick's Cafe American, which was a club, and I started working there as working with different people, and that's where I met Marion McParland.
wow. Okay.
I did some Midwest work with her, and Johnny Hartman I played with there. I played with quite a few really nice.
Wow.
Nice.
That's beautiful.
And that was right before I moved to New York, and I made up my mind I was going to move to New York.
Yeah. How did that decision come up? Like,
Well, I just wasn't happy in Chicago. I wanted to play, and I would get chances to play with people from other LA and New York, and they would all say, "Man, you should really think about moving." And I was working with Barney Kessel.
really? I didn't know. Wow, that's beautiful.
I worked with him in Chicago, and I was asking him, "What do you think I should do?" And Barney says, "You're going to come with me tonight. We're going to go have breakfast with some other guys." I'm like, "Okay." So we went to Rush Street, and it was Lorenzo Almeida and Ray Brown, Shelly Mann, and Bud Shank, who I went to have breakfast with.
Man, that's a nice group.
I was so shocked, and I was awestruck because I'd never met Ray.
Yeah.
And so we sat and we had breakfast, and and Barney brought up that I was thinking about moving, and Barney said he should move to New York, and Ray's like, "Yeah, you should move to New York." And I had gone to LA. I spent a week there, and I really didn't dig it as much as New York.
New York, yeah.
And then hearing them say that, so I made up my mind. April 1st, '79, I was moving.
Ah, you remembered the exact date. Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, April Fool's Day, the full
Yeah.
move. April Fool's Day. But the story is, at the time, I was going on a vacation with my first wife. Then we were going to go take a vacation before we moved to New York because I knew the money wasn't going to be as good as what I was making in Chicago. And we're getting ready to get on to leave, and the phone's ringing. And that's the old days, no cell phone.
Yeah.
There was a phone machine, and I'm getting ready to walk out the door, and I hear it's Marion McParland. So I run back in, and I pick up the phone, and she says, "I hear you're moving to New York." I says, "Yeah, I'm thinking about moving April 1st. She says, "Brian Torf has left the group. Would you like to be the bass player?"
Oh, wow.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
And she had a 4-week engagement, last 2 weeks of February, first 2 weeks of March at Michael's Pub in New York, which she flew me out to do, and I was planning to move April 1st.
Wow.
So I got out there, and I was working there with her, and I found an apartment. I rented an apartment, came back to Chicago. Those 2 weeks I worked with I worked with Sylvia Sims one week, and the next week, I don't remember who it was, but I worked like jazz gigs, and I was getting all these recording sessions too. And I said, "I'm moving." And everybody said, "You should stay in New York because you're working all the time."
Yeah.
And I'm like, "No, I'm moving April 1st. And I moved to New York April 1st, and I had the gig with Marion.
Yeah.
So I was very lucky. I mean, God, that's unbelievably lucky. And that night, when I got there and we were unloading the U-Haul truck, I'm bringing the truck back, and I run into Jim McNeely, who lived 2 blocks over, and he says, "Hey, what are you doing tonight?" And I said, "I'm unpacking." He says, "Well, we need a bass player with the Vanguard band. You want to play?" And I'm like, "Of
Oh,
course."
wow, man.
So I was very lucky, and that's where I met Billy originally, because he was playing with the band.
Yeah.
That was '79. So I was I was extremely lucky.
So
Very lucky.
your move to New York was quite smooth sailing, like in a way.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, because I had to work with Marion, and then I started subbing with the Vanguard band,
Yeah.
and then from working with Marion at Michael's Pub, I met a lot of other people. So, you know, I was very busy in the beginning there.
Yeah. How was the scene like early 80s? Like in New York, like the
I thought it was like being in Disneyland. There was so much going on, you know. Um, Bradley's was going. I remember going to
oh shit,
Bradley
Bradley's, of course. Yeah.
and Knickerbocker, and there were tons of clubs.
Yeah.
And I went in the first night. Well, I'd gone to Bradley's before when came to New York to visit, but walked in, and they had gotten Paul Desmond's piano before it was an upright piano. And I walked in, and it was Red Mitchell and Tommy Flanagan playing.
Wow, man.
And I'm like, oh, this is unbelievable. And the following week, it was Sam Jones and Cedar Walton.
Wow.
And I remember going out to the payphone, and I said to my dad, I says, guess what I'm listening to tonight? And I said, Sam Jones. He's like, I'm getting on an airplane. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
So it was right time, right place, man. What an education, Bradley's and Knickerbocker. And of course, the Vanguard, Sweet Basil's, all those clubs were going on.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. How did your story with Jim then begin?
Well,
When
that's
was
an
that,
interesting
like?
story.
Oh, please. Yeah.
That was quite a few years. That was a few years later. I got a call there was a record producer from Concord. Bob Golden was his name. And he's like, Jim is looking for some new bass players to audition. And I said, oh, okay, yeah, I'd love to do it. And I went and did the audition, and Elliot Zigman was playing drums. It was at Elliot's house. And I remember doing the audition, and my ears were exploding. I didn't know what note to play. I mean, really, there were so many possibilities, and I'd never played with anybody like that. And I actually didn't get the gig.
Oh, wow.
I didn't get the gig, and then the person that had the gig for a while took a night off, and Jim called me to sub, and that was at the Vanguard. It was a Sunday night at the Vanguard, and Jim hired me right there.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah, he's like, and you know, that went on 25 years off and on. So I was very fortunate.
Yeah, I saw some footage of you like being like really young, some pictures like, you know, with Jim, and I think was it Joey Barron on drums, maybe it was Joey.
Yeah, yeah, Joe. Well, that was one of my favorites.
Yeah,
and we did there's this stuff I posted on YouTube of a concert at the Smithsonian with Jim.
You play All the Things You Are, right? That's incredible. That's just
And that's the way it was. You know, we were supposed to do an album with Bill Frisell back in the early '80s.
Oh man,
with that group, and it didn't work out.
That's a shame.
So and they did record later, but I was not around then.
Yeah.
You know, I put a bunch of stuff on YouTube of some
I saw that. It's beautiful.
Recent recordings I turned up, and somebody gave me, I don't know if I posted that one, at the Regatta Bar with Michelle Petrucciani.
Really?
Tim Hall, myself, and Terry Clark. I don't think I posted that yet.
Wow.
And it was like somebody had a cassette recorder in their coat pocket, and it still sounds pretty good. And they recorded like both sets. That was very special because that was kind of like, I felt like, you know, it was like Bill Evans on steroids. You know, Michelle was such a gifted musician. Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I did a couple of trio dates with him.
Really?
In that period too. And after he moved, and it was always completely overwhelming, man. I never met anybody with so many ideas, and they just flowed and flowed and flowed.
Yeah.
What a gifted musician.
Incredible player.
Yeah. Funny guy too.
Yeah. But speaking of Jim, was it with Jim that you then first went to Europe also, like on a larger European tour, or?
Yeah, well, no, my first tour with Jim was, I think, Japan.
Japan, okay.
Concord record tour. Yes, that was my first tour with Jim. Was Japan for like 3 weeks, doing a Concord thing with. I got the poster right here. Let me look. Ray Brown All Stars, which was one of the groups, and then he had Mickey Roker and
Oh,
Al
wow.
Gene Harris and Ron Eschte,
Yeah,
guitar player,
guitarist. Yeah, sure.
and then Rosemary Clooney was on that one, and Emily Remler was on that one.
Really? Wow, man.
Scott Hamilton was there with his group, and they backed Rosemary, but John Otto played
Yeah.
piano, and Maxine Sullivan, who was a great old singer,
Sing.
was on that tour as well.
Wow.
So we got, and a lot of times we would play quartet with Emily and Jim.
Really?
Yeah.
How did those two guys sound together? Amazing, right?
Oh yeah. Well, Emily was an amazing player as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
And to hear the two of them together, yeah, so that was my first tour with Jim. And my
Wow.
first tour in Europe was with Joey and Jim.
How was that like for you, going like with those two guys in Europe, like your first like long experience?
Oh man, it was, and going to Italy was the first country, and I'm Italian on both sides.
Sure.
So like getting to go to Italy, it was just it was amazing. I remember we were there Easter Sunday, and sitting in a piazza in Ravenna.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Died and gone to heaven.
I know what I mean. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
I mean, I love Europe, and that was first time. Actually, the first time I went to Europe was with Stan Getz, but some years later it was with Jim.
Oh yeah, because before Jim, you played with Stan like a couple of years, right?
Yes, yes. I played off and on for a couple of years with
Yeah.
Jim, and I mean with Stan, with Jim
Yeah.
McNeely and Ralph Penland or
Yeah.
Victor Lewis, depending on who it was. Yeah.
Yeah, if you compare those two guys, I mean, such strong players, both of them. If you compare them, like being as band leaders, how were like Stan and Jim
Well,
like?
Stan, it depended on what his mood was, But basically, I mean, I got along with Stan royally, man. I mean, I knew he was a funny guy because if he wasn't hearing what he wanted, he would make your life miserable. And when I got the job, I asked Jim McNeely for some music, and Jim gave me a book of all Stan's tunes. And one of the records that I had of Stan was when he and Marc Johnson were playing "Sipping at Bells." So I said, I better learn that, and I worked on it. And I actually have a video of that gig. So I had the music stand, and I had "Sipping at Bells" was kind of hanging over here. So if I needed it, I could grab it real quick. The first tune he calls is "Sipping at Bells."
Smart.
Like here. And I had practiced it, made it through. He turned around, he said, "You're okay." And that was it.
Very easy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Stan, he had his frailties, he had his faults, but musically,
Yeah.
that was pretty incredible. I mean, the music that would happen.
Yeah.
And he would play Blood Count, and the goosebumps would come all over your body because it was so incredibly beautiful and soulful, and and Stan could completely annihilate you in 5 measures,
Such lines, yeah. I mean, incredible. Yeah.
And Jim was more soft spoken. The way you hear his music is the way he is. Jim, I'm very fortunate. The people I've toured with, I've been very lucky because they've all been great people, and they've treated
That's so important. Yeah.
everybody well.
Did you guys ever talk about music, like with Jim, like how to do things? Or
But mostly not.
not, right? Yeah.
Mostly not. Jim, we talk about books. I mean, in those days, I would bring 5 or 6 books with me. I was constantly reading. There was, the Walkman had just come out, the cassette Walkman, and that was it. That was it. And we talk a little bit about music. He'd tell me little stories now and then about different people, but
Yeah.
Jim was a great human being, and there was so much so much to him.
Yeah.
It wasn't always music.
Yeah,
And
that's important. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and then like if he had a tune that I didn't know, he generally give me changes. He wouldn't put me through sweating it, especially if you're
Yeah.
playing just guitar and bass, man, that could be a real train wreck.
Yeah.
So he was sensitive about that. Um,
That's beautiful.
yeah, yeah. Jim was, and we would do some. Jim never went out for more than 3 weeks,
Yeah.
21 days.
But that's
And
still a lot already. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of times we'd do a tour and it'd be 21 days and 17 one-nighters, you know. So it was pretty brutal. And I was
Yeah,
always
that's a tough
amazed
one.
how he held up. He held up great, Yeah,
Yeah.
you
So
know.
yeah, you have a connection going on with guitarists. We also
Yeah, I don't know
mentioned,
how that.
like with Vic, one of the first jazz records I got, a friend of mine who was like 10 years older, was music of Alec Wilder, that record by Vic, and you play on it. And I
Yes.
listened to, I didn't know who Alec Wilder was or anything, right? It was just like, he gave me this, like, since I was a beginning jazz guitarist, and I love that record and the compositions and everything. But I wanted to ask you, how did you meet Vic? Also, he was also one of the greats for me.
How did I get hooked up with Vic?
Yeah, when does your story begin? Since it
Oh,
lasted like a long time.
Vic was one of the first, probably the second or third guitar player I played with when I moved to New York.
Oh, wow.
And we were playing behind a singer. And I remember thinking how special he was. He was different than all the other
Yeah,
guitar players. He wasn't really coming from such a straight ahead bebop or whatever, Kenny Burrell kind of
yeah,
style. He was really going for his own voice. And um, we worked some gigs together. And when I started my band, the people that I chose, as I wanted people that had more of a unique voice. That
yeah,
I figured everybody's voice brought into my music would really create something, and that's why I picked Billy, because I
so
remember
unique. Yeah,
playing in the band with Billy, and I'd like, where's this guy getting these ideas?
floating. Yeah, and like
And
amazing.
he could sight read anything, he could play over any chord changes, and Vic was the same way, you
Wow.
know. And that was my main and Jeff Hirshfield had a unique
Yeah,
approach to drums, and I'm like, this is what I'm looking for. This is what I want.
yeah,
And I was fortunate all the records that we did together. And Vic and I used to work a lot of crazy gigs together too. And he could play any style. I think he was definitely one of the best guitar players of all time that
definitely.
people
Yeah.
really need to pay attention. It was so hard. I worked with him like 2 or 3 weeks before he passed.
Mm.
He was still out playing.
Yeah.
And young people he was teaching. He's an amazing teacher. He inspired a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I met Vic within like 1980. Is the
Damn,
first time we
that's
played together.
it's a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wanted to ask you another one about the album I have, The Return with Pat Martino, because it's also with Joey, and I love that record as well. And talking about guitarists, like we talk about Jim and Vic, and stylistically, I think Pat is completely other direction, at least to my ears. Like, how did that one happen?
I was very lucky to, like I said, be in the right place at the right time and to be able to try to make the people happy.
Yeah.
Back in the early 80s, when Joey came to New York, we hooked up, we did a bunch of record dates together.
Oh,
We used to, Mark Murphy, records, I forget who else. He did one with Marion McPartland and I. One of the last record I did with Marion, Joey played drums. And we just seemed to end up on a lot of things together. And somehow or another, Pat got my phone number. I don't remember if it
oh,
was
yeah.
Joey or whatever, and asked me to do this gig. And I know Harvey S. was working with, maybe he wasn't available, and that's how I got in there. But it was at Fat Tuesdays, and I don't know if you were ever at Fat Tuesdays.
Yeah, I know the place. Yeah, I have some bootlegs of.
Really, it was a really small club in the basement of this place, and yeah. So Pat asked me if I'd do the gig, and I said yes. And then I found out that Joe Fields was going to record it, and this was kind of like the last record that Pat had to do for his contract with this guy.
Okay.
They really didn't. I don't know what was going on, but you know. And of course, I was honored. You know, I had never played with Pat. I've never met him before, and so I show up at the gig. Joey's on it, and it was the loudest gig I'd ever played on acoustic bass.
He was really loud, Pat, or?
Yes, and it also was a small room, so like and a low ceiling. It was a small room with a low ceiling, and I remember Pat had stereo cabinets, and I had brought in. I was using Walter Wood's head with the Bose speakers, and I brought in 2 Bose speakers, and I had them stacked up, and it was the day when the terrible bass pickups. It was a Fishman pickup, and they only used the direct because it was so loud. And I remember Joey would hit the snare drum sometimes so hard he'd come off his stool, like that. And the music was hard, man, and loud and hard. And I remember we'd get through with the gig, and I was living in Pennsylvania then, and I had to drive an hour and 40 minutes to go home. And I wouldn't be able to make it. I was so tired.
Sure.
I'd sleep in my car for a half hour before I tried to make the drive. And so they recorded this thing, and whoever mixed it, they took different solos of mine and edited them together.
Yeah.
What is that for? And I don't know how much Pat cared about. He just wanted to get the record.
To get rid of it. Yeah.
He had no idea. I mean, I knew who Pat Martino was, but I had no idea how significant of a force he was in the guitar world.
Yeah. Funny.
So we did the record, and everybody's got it.
Yeah.
Everybody's got it. And it was an exhausting endeavor. I remember the first night when we're playing, the tables were right up against where you are. I mean, there was like 2 feet from the speaker cabinet.
Oh, shit.
And when I'd hit a low E, people's hair would blow from the ear. That's how loud it was.
Man, that's bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, Pat was very nice. He was very nice. And I worked 2 or 3 other gigs with him after that. But, yeah.
It's so funny because, like, Jim was like, I saw Jim live only once with, I think Scott Colley was on drums. I don't remember, on bass. I don't remember the drummer, but he was playing so low, the volume, I think,
Oh, yeah. Well, in the liner notes, I don't know if you read the liner notes to that.
No.
The guy that wrote the liner notes was really pissed because Pat wouldn't return his calls, and I guess he couldn't get a hold of Joey, and he ended up getting a hold of me. It was actually somebody I'd met in Chicago. And he says, what's the biggest difference between playing with Jim and playing with Pat? I'm like, well, Pat plays a lot louder. That's what else could I say?
That's true, man. Like, right? Like, yeah, so bizarre.
And people, that record is all over the place.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Especially the guitar world, like,
sure.
Yeah, I think it's quite important.
Pat, amazing. Just like totally like, and that was the other thing too. I was like, not only the volume, but the intensity in the music and the notes he was playing, which was like, I think I was in shock for the first couple of days,
But it's so cool also to hear you and Joey, because you played, let's say, with Jim and then with Pat, and it's completely different type of intensity, creative intensity. Jim created so much intensity with other tools than Pat, let's say. It's so nice to hear how you guys react also to that. Like, very different.
Well, Jim Jim was such a unique voice, and as is Pat.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And being a good rhythm section player, your job is to enhance what's going on front.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things about Joey's playing is it's just some of the most musical
Yeah.
music you'll ever hear come out of a drum set. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just and swinging. Oh my God.
Yeah, he's so swinging. Yeah.
And there's certain guys that I relate to, like after playing. I played with the Vanguard band for I don't know 3 or 4 years, and playing with Mel every night. Joey has that same kind of pocket.
Yeah.
Dennis McCrell has that same. There's certain guys that just their pocket is so big you could park a truck in it.
Yeah.
Just like and Joey's is that way, man. It's just a relaxed groove.
Yeah.
And as a bass player, where you're placing that quarter note, you have to change depending on who you're playing with sometimes.
Definitely.
Some drummers you have to play a little more on top, others a little behind. But
yeah.
with Mel and Joey, it's right down the center, man. And that's where I grew up. The guys that I came up with playing in Chicago a lot of them were coming out of the Vernell Fournet kind of school of drumming. With the beat in Chicago, everything was right in the center, man.
Yeah.
Big, and I think that's why Joey and I hooked up so well.
Yeah, he's such a I listened so much to the trio of Bill Frisell's, if you know that one, with Kermit Driscoll.
Yeah, great records.
Man, also them, like in a different style than you guys, because it's a different type of music, but like, it's like a chameleon. He's just like wherever you put him, it's amazing.
You got to think about Joey played with so many different kinds of people.
Yeah.
First time I heard him was he was playing with Carmen McRae.
Oh shit! I didn't know that. Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean Joey. One day he decided that he wasn't going to play straight ahead music anymore, and then he went and did that thing for a while, and then he came back playing straight ahead more. But he has this artistic thing in his head, man. That's truly unique and truly Joey, and he can play with anybody in any situation.
Yeah.
Mel Lewis was like that too. I remember playing a day with Mel Lewis, and it was kind of like eighth note-y kind of music. Oh, it was with Andy LaVerne and Mel. Andy's stuff is Andy's stuff,
Yeah.
And it can open and Mel was like, I'm like, wow, that's unbelievable. Mel was just playing Mel's style, and and there's those guys that do that. They work in any kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned Andy. I mean, I think I have 2 records of Andy with you with Anton Fig on drums.
Yeah, we did a lot of recording together.
Yeah. How did you hook up with Andy also? I mean, I love his playing. He's such also an amazing player.
Great stories here. You're going to get great stories. Well, I lived at 410 West 23rd Street when I moved to New York. My neighbor in 400 West 23rd Street was Andy LaVerne.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Across the street was Marc Egan. Joe Lovano lived down the street. Jim McNeely lived 2 streets over. Mike Stern lived down the street. I mean, there was all these people in Chelsea. That was the Chelsea area. And that's how I met Andy. And that's how we kind of hooked up. And some years later, he hired me to do the Steeplechase. And that's how I started with Steeplechase. It was because of Andy.
Yeah. Yes. I have this record, Glass Ceiling, I think. And it's so burning.
And there you go, Anton Fitz, was the the David Letterman drummer. For all those years.
Yeah, but on the other here he plays like amazing.
He played all the drum parts for Kiss.
No,
the rock and roll band, because those guys could. Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
Oh, yeah, man, because when those guys get in the studio, they couldn't.
Yeah, sure.
They'd have a hard time making it. And I remember seeing the record, the gold-plated record on his wall one time in his house.
Amazing.
I mean, Bernard Purdy did a couple tracks with the Beatles, right? So,
No, shit. I didn't know that. I didn't know for the Kiss story, really. Wow, that's amazing. I didn't know that. That's bizarre.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. You never know.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thanks so much, Steve, for
They have
sharing all
people
this stuff.
in and go.
Sorry?
Yeah, well, I got tons of stories, man. Tons of stories. A lot of different experiences in New York. It's
Yeah.
been very, very rewarding.
Yeah.
Dr. Jazz.